Well, hello. I hope you all are ready to join me at the ball. I put on my fancy best ball gown outfit because I'm ready to go. I want to find out what happens when Cinderella goes to this ball. So if you want to join me, I would love to see pictures of you in your best outfits. Sometimes, even though we're staying at home, it's fun to get a little dressed up and be a little fancy. So I would love if you join me, and we're going to find out what happens when Cinderella goes to the ball. But before we jump in to finish the story, we have to go over our answers from yesterday's questions and see who's doing that gold medal second grade ready work. So let's start with that. So we started reading our story Cinderella by Marcia Brown yesterday. And our thinking job was, what are the key details of the story, the most important parts of the story to help us understand it? And I had 3 questions to help us figure some of those out. So let's go over our answers. Number 1, who are the main characters in the story so far? And I left some blank lines for you to fill in, so let's see who got them. The main characters are Cinderella, of course, the main character, the title of the book. And I had that number 2 there to help you with the 2 daughters or the 2 stepsisters. And then, of course, the fairy godmother, a very important part of the beginning of the story. How'd you do there? Pat yourselves in the back. Number 2, what does Cinderella do when the stepsisters ask for help getting ready? These were your choices. The answer is C. Cinderella helps them even though they are mean to her. Gold star for some gold medal work. Hope you got that one. And number 3, why does Cinderella have to be home by midnight? Here were your answer choices. The answer is B. The fairy godmother tells her the magic will end at midnight. How did you do? If you got one of those right, kiss your brain. If you got 2 of those right, raise the roof. If you got all 3 right, do a dance, you did that. Excellent work. And if you didn't get any of them, don't worry, you have another chance to earn gold medal work today. We have a new thinking job when we're finishing the story today. Your thinking job is, what is the central message of the story? And another way of saying the central message is to say the lesson learned. That means what we as readers or people not in the story can learn from it. This is challenging, so definitely gold medal work and showing your second grade ready if you can do this one today. So how do we figure out the central message of the story? You take the character's problem and you add it or put it together with the solution, and that will tell you the lesson learned. And like I said, the lesson learned, another way of saying that is the central message, which again is what we as readers, someone not in the story, can learn from what the character went through. I'm going to show you an example from our story from a couple weeks ago, Brave Irene. What was Brave Irene's problem in her story? Irene wants to deliver the Duchess's gown, but there was that powerful snowstorm and the wind made it really difficult for her to get the dress there. Now, how did she solve that problem? Irene never gives up and is creative to face the storm. She tried different ways to go against the wind, and even when she lost the dress, she still didn't give up. So what lesson did Irene learn from the story? Irene learns to never give up and be creative to find solutions to your problem. Now, we're not walking through a snowstorm with a dress to try to deliver to a duchess, but what lesson can we learn from what Irene went through? We can learn that we should never give up when we have something important to accomplish, even when there's challenges against us. We should always keep trying. See how we did that? We took the problem and the solution that Irene had and put it together to figure out what we can learn and apply to our own lives. So we're going to do the same thing today with our Cinderella story. Figure out the problem, the solution, and the lesson learned, which will help us get the central message of the story. Ready to get started? We're off to the ball. Now, when the king's son learned that a grand princess whom no one knew at all had just arrived at the palace, he ran out to receive her. He offered her his hand as she alighted from the coach and led her into the ballroom, where all the company was assembled. Then A deep silence fell over the room. Everyone stopped dancing. The violin stopped playing. All eyes turned to the great beauty of this mysterious one. Only a low murmur rippled over the gathering. Oh, how beautiful she is. The king himself, old as he was, could not take his eyes off her, and whispered in a low voice to the queen that it had been a long time since he had seen anyone so charming and beautiful. The ladies were busy studying her headdress and her gown in order to have some made just like them the next day. If only they could find stuffs as fine and workmanship as skillful. The young prince conducted Cinderella to the seat of greatest honor, and then led her out on the floor to dance. She danced with so much grace that people wondered at her more than ever. A most splendid feast was served, but the prince did not taste a mouthful. So intent was he in gazing at Cinderella. Cinderella went to sit near her stepsisters and paid them 1,000 courtesies. It's another way to say compliments. She shared with them some oranges and lemons, which the young prince had given her. The sisters were completely astonished. They did not recognize her at all. Suddenly, Cinderella heard the clock chime 11 hours and 3/4. Pause. Math connection, telling time. 11 hours and 3/4. Does anyone know what time that is? It would be 11:45, which means it was only 15 minutes until midnight. Do you remember what happens at midnight? All right, let's get back to the story. She immediately made a deep curtsy to the company and hurried off as quickly as she could. When Cinderella got home, she went to look for her godmother and thanked her. Then she told her how she longed to go to the ball the following night. The prince had begged her to come. While she was telling her godmother everything that had happened at the ball, her two stepsisters knocked on the door. Cinderella ran to let them in. How late you are, she said, rubbing her eyes and stretching as if she had just waked out of a sound sleep. While they were gone, she had had no wish to sleep. If you had come to the ball, said one, you would not have been bored, I can tell you. A most beautiful princess came, the most beautiful princess anyone could hope to see. She paid us 1,000 courtesies. She gave us oranges and lemons. Cinderella was delighted. What was the name of this princess? They answered, no one knows. The king's son is desperate. He would give anything to know who she is. At this, Cinderella smiled and said softly, she was then so beautiful? My goodness, how lucky you are. Wish I could see her. Mademoiselle Javotte, lend me your yellow outfit that you wear for every day. Really, said Javotte, I like that. Lend my clothes to a filthy cinder seat like you. I should be mad. Cinderella expected this snub. She was secretly relieved, for what would she have done if her sister had been willing to lend her her dress? The next night, the two sisters were off again to the ball, and so was Cinderella, but this time even more splendidly dressed than before. The prince never left her side. All evening, he paid her charming compliments. The young miss found this so far from boring that she forgot her godmother's warning. What was her godmother's warning? She had to be home by midnight, right? She was horrified to hear the first stroke of midnight before she thought it could be 11 o'clock. She rose and fled as lightly as a doe. The prince followed her, but he could not overtake her. He couldn't catch her. In her haste, Cinderella dropped one of her glass slippers. The prince gathered it up with the greatest care. Cinderella reached home all out of breath, with neither coach nor footman and in rags. Nothing was left of her finery but one little glass slipper, the mate to the one she had lost. The guards at the palace gate were questioned. Had they seen a princess leave? No, they had seen no one but a young woman in rags, and she looked more like a peasant girl than a fine young lady. Wait, so who was that young woman in rags? Yeah, it was Cinderella, but she was back in her old clothes because it was after midnight. When the two sisters returned from the ball, Cinderella asked them if they had enjoyed themselves again, and if the beautiful lady had been there. They told her, oh yes, she was there, but at the stroke of midnight, she fled from the palace. She dropped one of her little glass slippers, the prettiest in the world. The king's son found it, and he did nothing but gaze at it all during the rest of the ball. He certainly has fallen head over heels in love with the owner of the slipper. They spoke truly. For a few days after the ball, the king's son had his herald sound throughout the land that he would marry her whose foot would fit the little slipper. First, they tried it on princesses, then on duchesses and all the ladies of the court, but it was no use. They brought it to the two sisters, who did their best to force their feet into the little slipper, but they could not. Cinderella was looking on and recognized her slipper, so she laughingly said, "Let me see if it would fit me." Her stepsisters burst into shrieks of laughter. "Feather, oh, fit Cindersy!" How they mocked her or made fun of her. But the gentleman who had been sent to try on the slipper looked intently at Cinderella. Finding her beautiful, he said it was no more than right. He had been ordered to try it on all the young ladies. Now here we have a part of problem of this part of the story. What was the problem here? Well, Cinderella was about to try on the shoe, but her sisters were laughing at her and making fun of her, right? Not cool. Let's see what happens. He had Cinderella sit down and sliding the slipper on her little foot, he saw that it fitted her perfectly, just as if it had been made of wax. The astonishment of her sisters was great, but greater still when Cinderella drew from her pocket the little glass slipper which she slipped on her other foot. She had the matching shoe. Then suddenly her godmother appeared. Touching Cinderella's rags with her wand, she changed them into a costume still more magnificent than any she had worn before. Now her stepsisters recognized her. Cinderella was the beautiful person they had seen at the ball. They threw themselves at her feet and begged forgiveness for all their bad treatment of her. Cinderella asked them to rise, embrace them, and told them she forgave them with all her heart. She begged them to love her always. Now, we just said the problem was that her sisters were making fun of her. How did Cinderella solve this problem? Yeah, it says she forgave them and embraced them, meaning she gave them a hug. So kind. Cinderella was conducted to the young prince, dressed as she was. He found her lovelier than ever, and a few days afterwards married her. Cinderella, who was as good as she was beautiful, gave her sisters a home at the palace, and on the same day married them to two great lords of the court. And they lived happily ever after. The end. Hope you enjoyed the story. I'm sure some of you are familiar with how it was going to end. So let's get to our thinking job and figure out the lesson learned. Now, what was the problem in this part of the story? Back at the beginning, I would say the problem was that Cinderella couldn't go to the ball, and she really wanted to go. And then it was solved because her godmother, her fairy godmother, used her magic to help her go to the ball. That was in the beginning part of the story. Remember, what was the problem in this part of the story that we read? Cinderella's stepsisters laugh and make fun of her when she asks to try on the glass slipper. And what did Cinderella do about that problem? Cinderella hugged her sisters and she forgives them. Even though her sisters were being mean to her and making fun of her, she forgave them and gave them a hug. So, what is the lesson learned? I'm not going to tell you. That's for you future second graders to figure out. And once you figure out the lesson learned that Cinderella learned, you can apply that to yourself to answer the question, what can we learn from the story? So that is your assignment for today, to figure out the lesson that Cinderella learned, and then take that and apply it to yourself to figure out what lesson we can learn from the story. As always, get ready to show off that gold medal second grade ready work by taking a picture and sending it to your teachers. Tune in tomorrow when we will go over the answers. See you then.